ahead and get started. Okay, so you're in the 796 talk. It's ASP.NET 4.5 loves HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. So if that's not the talk you're wanting to be in, you probably should leave and have your eyes checked because it's been up there for a while. My name is Matthew Osborne. I'm a software development engineer on the ASP.NET team. The ASP.NET team is kind of a broad term. It's not technically the ASP.NET team. We own everything from ASP NET Core to web forms to MVC to web pages to NuGet to web matrix. So pretty much everything that's at that web platform booth in the expo we kind of own. And I've probably worked on it at some stage. So let's get started. So what should you know by the end of this talk? The first and most important thing for me is that you know how to use HTML5 and CSS3 after leaving this talk. You know what it's about, and you can go back to your office and immediately start coding this. The second thing I want you to know is that the ASP.NET team, my team, actually cares about this stuff, and we're making some changes to make this stuff easier for you and to point you in the right direction. So how are we going to answer those two questions? The first is I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why you need to care about HTML5 and CSS3. A lot of the talks don't really cover that. They just kind of assume that you know it. If you know it, great. Still listen up. You might find something new. Otherwise, I want you to know it's something more than just a marketing guy told you it's easier to sell an HTML site than an HTML5 site other than an HTML4 site. Then I want to spend some time talking about the changes we're making. So the runtime changes, the designer changes, template changes, those types of things. And the third thing I want to kind of wrap up with is talking a little bit about some of the issues you face when you start coding this stuff right now, and then how you can actually work around all those issues, because pretty much everything can be worked around in some way, shape, or form. So what is all the fuss about? HTML5, CSS3 are kind of a new standard for a new web. So when I very first got on the internet, I got my modem, dialed into AOL, and I had an AOL window. That was what I knew of the internet. Now, I can log into the Olympics website, view, 800 camera angles, replay everything. Every Sunday, I get to watch all the football games. So the internet has progressed a lot just in my short lifespan. And a lot of what's being done was being done on old standards. So it was actually kind of difficult to do. So they've created some new standards that make these things easier to do. So what is inside of these? So there's really two things. There's kind of new elements and new functionality. And then there's elements that kind of blur the line. For instance, there's new elements like header, footer, navigation, those types of things. There's new functionality, box shadow, text shadow, WebSockets. I'm not going to really cover WebSockets, but right after my talk, one of my colleagues is giving a talk in the same room. So if you're interested in that, just stay here. And then there's things that kind of blur the line between a new element and new functionality. Things like the audio tag, the video tag, the canvas tag. All those types of things kind of blur the line. And those two things really come together to provide what I call the 3 S's, which it makes your markup smaller, simpler, and more semantic. So I want to take some time to talk about each one of those. The first is smaller. So I have an example of some content here. This is a very simple thing. Basically, I'm just showing you rounded corners. This is very common. Lots of websites like to have rounded corners because square is bad, apparently. So on the left side of the screen, you have what it used to be done, what it would take to write it in CSS2. And for those of you in the back, you probably can't see it. I had to smush it really, really small. It requires a lot of CSS. Basically, there's 4 images, 1 for each corner. And then there's also kind of a placeholder div in each corner that's kind of absolutely positioned. It was a lot of work there, a lot of markup. On the right-hand side of the screen is the CSS3 version. Very, very small. All you have to do is say border radius. It's done. No extra markup, no nothing. I'm actually including vendor prefixing here, which I'll cover in just a little bit in my talk, which actually makes it even a little bit bigger than it absolutely has to be per the standard. So that's how it can make your markup smaller. So how can I make your markup simpler? So this is a sample of a form, a very simple form, and it's got some watermarks on the text box. A lot of UX designers like to put them there, give some kind of sample data. So in HTML4, you actually had to write some JavaScript to achieve this. And you don't really have to, if you can't see in the back, don't worry. Once again, I had to kind of smush it to be able to fit it on one slide. But basically, the gist of what it is when the page loads, I had to pull out the title attribute, grab the value from inside of it, set that value as the value of the text box, then add a class to make it appear as if it was a watermark, so kind of grayed out. And then I had to know that when a user entered that text box, I needed to remove all of that. And then when they exited that text box, I had to figure out if they've typed in something or if they haven't. Now, this seems kind of trivial, but it's a really easy way that you could screw it up and really make your users mad. Because if I go to your form, I type something in, I tab out of it, and I lose what I just typed, I'm going to be pretty upset. So you can see how it's very complex. But on the right side in HTML5, it's as simple as putting an attribute, placeholder. That's all you have to do. You can see how that can make your markup much simpler, is kind of leveraging HTML5. And the last and most important to me is that your markup is more semantic. So on the left side of the screen, you have kind of a standard little sample layout. It uses divs, and I've defined a header, some navigation, things like that. And the metadata is there. It's inside the class or ID. There's no standard way of defining whether I need, the header is done with ID, how you spell it, capitalization, things like that. But on the right side of the screen, you can see that the metadata is actually embedded into each one of the tags. I'm using the header tag, the navigation tag, the footer, article. All that metadata is there. So why is it important to you that this stuff is semantic? Well, two things. Number one is if the browser has a better idea about what you're trying to do, so if it has some information about the content you're trying to present, it can make better default choices for you. And that comes back around to making your markup smaller and simpler. There's less code you have to write if the browser can make better determinations about what it should default to for rendering. And lastly is, if any of you have worked with government websites, it's very important in government websites that your sites be accessible. So previously, screen readers used to have to rely on things like attributes, accessibility attributes like role, aria, those types of things to actually know where the navigation is, where the header is for a given section. But in this, that metadata is actually embedded into the tag itself. So it's very easy for screen readers and accessibility software to understand your markup as well. So all those, the three S's kind of combined lead to better experiences. Better experiences for both you, the developer, because it makes your life easier. The amount of code you have to write is less, and the complexity of the code you have to write is less. And then it also makes for better user experiences for the people that are consuming your code. So I have an example of what an end user experience would be like. So I have playing a video. What it used to be like in HTML4, I went to YouTube. I heard about this really cool building Windows 8 video. Went to YouTube. I see, oh, yeah, I have to install a Flash player. I have to go download it, have to install it. Then I can go back and actually run the site, or run the video and watch the video. That's not that bad, but still from an end user's perspective, why did I actually have to go install something? My machine already knows how to play videos. I can watch DVDs on it. Why did I have to go install Flash or Silverlight or something like that? But with HTML5, it's as simple as just hitting the website, and you can actually view the website. Now, there's some issues with this, and I'll talk about that in a later part of my talk. But you can see here that we're just playing the site, and that box is there to kind of prove that it's HTML5. I'm not using the Flash player, and I'm using IE9. OK, so what are the changes the ASP.NET team is making to kind of help you with these things? So this is kind of the more exciting part of the talk. We're going to jump basically straight into demos. OK, so here I'm going to kind of switch between web forms, MVC, all of those. I'll try to call it out when I switch in between applications, but what I'm showing you is kind of generic across everything. These are kind of some improvements that we've done for everything. So this is a very simple web forms app. It's an empty web forms app, and I've added a default.aspx page to it. And if you can see here up at the top, we've always had validation. We've always supported validation, and in the last version of Visual Studio, we had HTML5 validation. But you actually had to come in here and check which checkbox, or select which type of validation you wanted. But you might have already noticed there's this new button there which says Use Doc Type. If I click the dropdown, there's actually no other type for me. So what we've done is we actually parse the document and understand what wanting us to do. You've already told us by coding that document and such that you want HTML5 validation. You can see I removed the namespace, so it's changed to HTML5 instead of XHTML5. And just to kind of reiterate that, there's a snippet for HTML4 strict. And if I click around, you can see how it's already changed. So we don't actually want HTML4 strict. It's not an HTML4 talk. So we are just going to change this back to HTML5. And you'll see that it changes. It kind of takes a second sometime, but it changes. So then another thing that we've done as an editor improvement to kind of help you out, it's not necessarily strict to HTML5, but it's very common and best practice to put a character set meta tag at the top of your document so the browsers understand what you're doing. And if I just press tab, we've now added some snippets for character sets. And then we've taken it one step further, is if I come in here, we've actually chosen basically the top few character sets that we've seen. We did some polling to figure out what the top ones were and actually included them in IntelliSense. So those are there now. And here's one of my favorite features because I use this all the time when I'm demoing. You might have already seen it. Apparently it was shown in some of the other talks. But so I've got a page, and I don't want to do divs. Divs are old school. I want to make it sections because section is the new HTML5 hotness. So if you can see as I'm typing here, the closing tag is actually changing with me. And it works both ways. So I can come down to the closing tag as well and change the closing tag, and it works as well. So this is something I really like because I make a lot of typos. Or if you have a website that you're trying to convert, you want to make more semantic, you want to replace some tags, it makes it very quick to come in and kind of fix those things up. I spoke a little bit about support for roles. So we have those now, and then also the ARIA, which is basically attributes that accessibility software will read from. So we've actually added those in the list, and they're validated now, so you get IntelliSense for all those roles. So what I want to do now is I want to kind of create a kind of a sign-up form. I'm going to do a real quick sign-up form here, just to add a legend. And then to make my markup semantic, sign-up forms are kind of ordered lists of things that you fill out. So what I want to do is I'm going to add a label here. I don't need that. I'm going to give it an associated control ID. And one feature that I want to point out is if I press equal right now, you can see how we actually get quotes as well, and the cursor jumps inside the quotes. That's a feature that we've had since Visual Studio 2010. But it wasn't on by default, and we've actually now turned that on by default. So everything's auto-quoted, and it's actually going to save you a few keystrokes. And let's give it some text. OK. So now we need to actually create the text box for them to enter their email. Let's give it an ID. And then I'm actually going to put a text mode on this. So for our controls, we've actually added all the new input types in the text box. So there's the color input type, the date, time, email. So we have support for those all now. And so I don't have to waste your time here. I have the rest of the form here. And you can see what I've done is just a bunch of text boxes. Just a very simple form. I have things like I'm using the phone number input type, the number input type, color. And the last thing that I would like to do is I want to come down here, and I want to add a place for them to upload their files, or to upload a picture of themselves to be used on the site. So I'm going to do, call this files. And the last thing I want to do is I actually want to support allowing them to upload multiple pictures at a time. That's part of the HTML5 standard. So you can see we've added an attribute for allow multiple. And this will render out the appropriate code that's needed to tell the browser that you can actually select more than one file to upload at a time. So you don't need to actually have multiple file uploads on the page. And then lastly, I want to finish here by adding a button just to finish it off. Let's call this sign up, and we'll give it run at the server, give it some text, And then lastly, we need to actually wire it up so it does something. So on the onClick event, you can see now that when I enter inside the quotes, I get this new IntelliSense which says create new event. So if I go ahead and do that, basically what I've done is invoked the smart task that's existed a long time in the design surface, but I now can invoke any smart task from the code behind. So that includes, if you remember, the data binding wizard, auto event wire up. All those are now available from the design, from the code surface, so you don't actually have to go anywhere. So I'm going to come into this method that it's created for me, and I just wanted to show you that and do files dot, and now there's some extra APIs to allow you to actually grab those posted files. So posted file will just return the first one. Posted files returns a collection of those, but I'm not actually going to do anything. And then I just kind of want to run it and show you what it looks like. So I want to show you what it looks like in IE and then also in Chrome. So I already have Chrome running. If you look in IE, we're going to talk about this. This is IE9, not IE10. IE10 does support this. I just didn't get it early enough to put it on this box for the demo. But you can see how the browser supports, Chrome will support numbers, so I get a nice up-down. We'll talk about why it doesn't support things like email, color, stuff like that later on in the talk. So you've kind of seen what it looks like now, but I want to take it a little further. I want to make it look, halfway decent. So I'm not a designer, so don't shoot me if it doesn't look too good, but I'm just going to add a style sheet here. And before I forget, I always forget to do this, so I'm going to come and add it here so it'll show up. OK, so I want to show you some improvements we've also done to the CSS editor, which is important to me because I spend a lot of time in CSS. So we're going to select the section that's in there. And inside there, I actually want to change the background. I want to give it a background. So if I do background color, press colon, you see now that I get this new color picker. And this color picker is not really that interesting right now, but if I had other colors defined in my style sheet, those would show up first. So we actually skim the style sheet for all the colors that you have first, and those will be in first. This is also fully extendable, so if you have a company color palette, like an approved set of colors you can use, you can actually put those in the front of this as well. We're actually pretty smart about whether we will use shorthand, so when a shorthand code is available, we'll use that. But if I press the down arrow again, you can see I get a nice full color picker, all kinds of colors. I can do transparency. You can see we're also smart about choosing RGBA versus hex. So if there's no transparency, we go back to hex. Otherwise, we choose RGBA. And then one of my favorite features is I can actually click here on the watermark and select, let's say I want it to be this blue color. My cursor's still up there, which is kind of nice, so I can just press colon to get rid of that. So then let's say I don't want that border around the field set. So I want to come in here, and then I want you to watch what happens when I close this. Oops. When I close the curly brace. You can see how we've indented that over. So this is a feature we've added because we're doing it a lot on our own, which is nesting of selectors. So it understands that field set, this rule only applies to a field set that's under a section, and there's a selection selector right above it, so it nests it over. And it gives your style sheets kind of a nice flow. You can look for higher level items, or if they're more fine-grained, you know to look over in the document more. So I'm going to say I want to remove the border, so I'm just going to say none. And then one thing I forgot to do is, because we want rounded corners, right? Because everyone likes rounded corners. We want to come in here, and we want to give a border radius to this. You can see we have a snippet for this now. And if I do this, I got a whole bunch of code really, really quickly. So what we've done is we've added all the vendor prefixing for everything that generally needs vendor prefixing. In short, since I've mentioned it a few times now, vendor prefixing is just a way for a vendor to support kind of any style because the standard is changing, and we'll talk about that. But previously, you used to get green squigglies for this not being valid. That doesn't work anymore. Like we validate, we understand that this is valid. And then we've even taken it one step further, and we give you IntelliSense on all the vendor prefixed items as well, because we understand that you're going to need to do those types of things. Okay. Yeah, you can clap. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Okay, and then the last thing is I just want to remove the numbers from the ordered list. And you can see, once again, we keep going. We keep nesting everything as much as it needs to be. So I'm just going to say list style, none. And then I'll just run this, and hopefully I've done everything right and not made any typos. So you can see now it's kind of really bad color scheme, but you can see now how we get rounded corners, background color, all those cool things are added now. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about here is, let me open up this. So this was kind of mentioned in the keynote already, today's keynote, is it's very commonplace now to want to bundle things together. So what that means is you kind of want to take all your JavaScript files and you want to smush them together into one file and minify it, so then it's only one request to the server. Same with your CSS. It's very common practice. It kind of got to be that way because browsers used to have a limit of 2 requests that they can make to the same server at a time. Newer browsers have upped that amount, but you still don't want to be requesting 500 JavaScript files before you actually send down anything to do with images or any of the other content. So we had previously released an AJAX minifier that would do AJAX and CSS. But for this, we've taken this one step further. And this is available as a NuGet package. If you don't know what NuGet is, please come and find me after this talk. I'll be right over there. I work on the NuGet team. It's pretty awesome. So if you don't know what it is, find me. But we ship this as a ASP.NET optimization bundle. And that comes installed in all of our templates. We'll talk about NuGet packages and our templates prior to that. So what you need to do here is, well, actually, let me just run this real quick and show you what it looks like. So I stopped that just so I could pull up the developer tools. It's the F12 developer tools if you don't know what they are. So I want to start capturing my network traffic, and then I want to run. So you can see how we're making several requests here, a lot of which is some CSS for jQuery UI. And then we have a few JavaScript files up here as well that we're requesting. So that's kind of what I mean by lots of requests sent to the server. So by default, we have a bundle. So bundle. Bundles work just like routing. They have a bundle table. And in the bits that you guys can download and have right now, you can see that there's actually 2 namespaces, system.web.optimization and then microsoft.web.optimization. So we were originally going to ship this in the box as ASP.NET 4.5, but we realized, hey, there's really no reason why we can't give this to people using ASP.NET 4. So we actually pulled it out of the box, made it a NuGet package so you can actually use it without having to use the new runtime. So then you have a collection of bundles, and then the only thing you really have to do is enable the default bundles. And what the default bundles are is on any folder you can request /JS or /scripts. So to kind of fix that up a little bit, so I want to come in here and let's just say here, I want to make this just /JS. And I don't need this anymore either. Okay, so if I run this, you should see some reduction, but we still have a lot of CSS. So, also I should point out, so keen people in the audience might be saying, well, how do you know underneath the folder? There's ordering, there's lots of different files, so there's minified versions, there's VS-doc files. So we have some special logic to exclude VS-doc files, .VS-extension files, and .debug files, so those won't actually be included. And then if you have a minified version, so a .min file, we'll choose the .min over the regular file. And then also for ordering, we understand that things like jQuery need to come before jQuery UI. So we have built-in ordering for jQuery, Modernizer, Dojo, Moo, and a few others. I don't have the full list. And then also for CSS, we also have some built-in ordering. So if you have a normalized file or a reset file, we'll actually include those first because we understand. But let's say in this example, CSS is still pretty picky about the kind of ordering you can have. So I actually want to come in here, and I want to create my own bundle. So if you have something that we don't have built-in logic for, and you need to kind of do your own ordering, so you need it to go CBA, you can create your own bundle. So I'm going to do that. I believe it's jQuery UI CSS. Let me just check my notes here. CSS bundle. So I'm going to create a new bundle. So I have to give it a virtual path. So where do I want it to, if I request something? So if I request content slash CSS, let's say. No, that's the default one, jQuery. So if I request content slash jQuery UI, this is actually going to kick in. This bundle is going to serve itself. And then the last thing is I need to specify what it is. And this is a CSS. We have CSS minify and JS minify. It just tells us which minifier to run it through. So we're going to create a CSS bundle here. And then for the sake of time, I have included all the bundles here. So basically what I've done is you just say bundle.add file. And the files are included in the order in which you add them. And you still get on all the built-in logic for things like a reset, stuff like that. And then the last thing you need to do is you just need to come to your bundle table, bundles.add, and then add your jQuery bundle, or jQuery UI CSS bundle. So then if I come in here, and I can just remove I think that's what I called it, right? Let's make sure. Yes. So if I build, you've got to build because it's a global ASAC, so it has to be compiled. So if I come in here, I'm still capturing, and I run the site. You can see how I've got a dramatically reduced amount. I'm still getting some images, but you can see how now my CSS is being served up in one request, and it's actually smaller than the sum of all the parts because we've actually minified them as well. So instead of just serving the unminified files, we've gone through and minified them as well. Well, you guys are easy to please. OK, so the last thing I want to talk about is our new templates. So Scott Gu kind of mentioned these, showed them off a little bit in the keynote today. This is near and dear to me because I've spent the last 2 months of my life writing these. So if you haven't seen them, you weren't able to see the keynote, I'm just going to run it here. But what we wanted to do for the first time in a very long time is actually unify all of our templates. So across all of our web frameworks, so MVC, web pages, and web forms, we now have templates that basically look exactly the same. The text is a little different. The text is actually kind of a getting started text. For those of you that maybe never used MVC, it kind of suggests some things that you should be doing. That's pretty much the only thing that's changed. The styles haven't really changed. Unfortunately, in the bits that you guys are going to be able to get, the web form templates aren't quite there. I have a copy of them. We had to shut down a little too early to be able to get them in, but the web pages and the MVC4 bits will actually have these templates. So I kind of want to just show you a little bit of what we've done. This is kind of the overview. This is what Scott Gu showed. That's not very exciting. So let's jump in. They're very HTML5. They have a header. They have some navigation, some sections, footer. That's not too terribly interesting. If we go to the About page, we have some more interesting things. We're using things like hgroup. What an hgroup is used to do is group heading tags together. So if you have a title and then a subtitle, you would use an hgroup to kind of group them together, and that's what we're doing here. We're using an article to define this, and I get a lot of questions around people asking me when should you use an article over a section. I have a great analogy, which is treat it like a newspaper. In a newspaper, you can clip out an article, hang it up on your wall, and if somebody comes by, doesn't know that they came from a newspaper, they can understand that. They don't have to know, what day's newspaper it came from, anything like that. Standalone content makes sense. So it should be just like that for the web. So if you were to just pull out the text, print it out, hang it up on the wall, would somebody understand it without knowing it came from XYZ website? So that's when you should use an article over a section. We're using an aside here as kind of a side panel with some other content that shouldn't be related to this. Some people might argue that this isn't the appropriate use of an aside. We're doing this simply because we don't have, to create a semantic website, you have to have content. We don't have content. We kind of had to fib content in some places, just to give you kind of an idea of what to do. So we've done the best that we can with what content we have. We don't know what you guys are going to be building. We don't want to know. We want you guys to go build the crazy things that we've never even thought of. So we kind of had to do the best that we can with these. So another cool thing that I take a lot of pride in is, Scott Gu showed this off a little bit, but he just showed it in the browser. So if I come in here, I've got the Opera emulator for a mobile browser, and I run this. You can see that we actually have a nice mobile view. Previously, before, if you viewed our templates, the big blue ones, you would have to do a lot of panning around. You'd have to zoom in to actually read text. So we've created a nice overview here. You can see we've changed some UI elements around. We moved kind of the register and login. We no longer have the 1, 2, 3 images. We've done some nifty tricks here to remove the images to reduce the vertical scroll. So we understand that this is mobile. You don't want your users having to constantly scroll up and down. So we've done a lot of work there. So if I want to open this up and show you the site.css so you can see how we've done some of that. So how we've chosen to do that is with a media query. Basically, this media query says all the styles below only apply if the width is less than 850 pixels. That's kind of the width we've chose. We did a little playing around and found that that's kind of the best. You can see how we follow the navigation or the indentation rule. We've put a lot of comments in here, so this should actually be pretty easy for you to go through and understand what we've done. And we're really excited about this because this gives kind of a really, really good boilerplate for somebody that has never done HTML5 and CSS3 to be able to come in and start with something good. It's actually really easy to take these and create a deployable site. I actually deployed my own personal site on this. The link is at the end, so you can kind of go see what it looks like when you would modify it for a real-world application. So let's jump back to the slides here. OK. So how can you use HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript today? The good news is you just can. But there's probably a few things we should talk about first so you understand. So the standard isn't slated to be ratified anytime soon. It's one of those things, standards take a long time to be ratified. So it's not going to be ratified anytime soon. And what that meant is browsers really don't know how to support things. There's things that aren't really defined yet. I mentioned this when playing a video. The standard doesn't really call out what codec you should be using for a video yet. There's some argument on whether it should be H.264 or WebM. I'm not going to get into that, but things like that, things like names, border radius, how you would do rounded corners changed often early on. So that's kind of why things were, the vendor prefixing was introduced. And because of all that, you still have some limited support, even in your newest browsers. Your browsers aren't going to be able to support things that they're not quite sure about. And then lastly, the other problem is you might be saying this is fine and great, but what happens if I'm using IE7? So I'm on an old school website, IE7. I'm not going to even have IE9 because of my system admin until HTML12 comes out. Well, there's ways around that. You can actually work around that. And I want to show you how you can actually work around some of those things. Close out a few of these windows. OK. Change out. Get this set up. Sorry about that. OK. So if I just run this site, what I have here is basically a very simple application I wrote. It's kind of a dummy application. It's basically a blog. You have a post, you have some text inside the post, and then you have a little space at the bottom for ads asking if you want to advertise here. And then you have a couple different headings, and you have a nice little footer. Nothing too complex. But if I run this, and I'm going to minimize the developer tools. And if you don't know this, you can actually change the rendering engine that's used. So I want to see what this looks like in IE7. You can actually see that it doesn't do too bad of a job, right? It still kind of works. But I've lost a lot of my styling. So without going too deep into it, basically, older browsers had a list of tags that they were aware of that they could render against. And obviously the new tags aren't in that list, so it has no idea, so it just kind of ignores them. So you can't style or script against them. So how can we fix that? So if we open up the default page, there's a little bit of JavaScript that we can include here. And so you don't have to see me type it all out. Ooh, wrong one. So basically what I've done here is add a little bit of script at the top of the page. Now, what this does is it's doing a very simple document.create element on each one of these elements that I'm using inside the page. It's not doing anything with it. It's just creating it, not assigning it, not putting it in the DOM anywhere. But this is kind of a little trick that you can do. Browsers, as soon as you scripted an element, would understand and put that into the list of things that can be scripted against or styled against, right? So this is a very nifty trick that somebody figured out. And if I come back, I got to save the state first. And if I come back and I view it here, you can see that I'm getting some of my styles being applied. I've kind of got this advertising style kind of grayed out applied, and I've got what appears to be the border set, but it's kind of weird and funky. So what's happening here is that when you create an element and the browser doesn't know about it, it treats them as inline elements. So without going too much into it, it's not a block element, and all of our styling is based on the fact that these styles are block. So if I come in here and we can fix that. So all you have to do is reset the ones that are supposed to be blocks back to blocks. So I come in here and run this. You can actually see in IE7 mode, I'm down here, still in IE7. I've got what appears to basically be my site back. Right? So this is an easy way that you can kind of style and use these things. But I understand that that's still kind of difficult. You don't want to have to write all this JavaScript, so we've taken it one step further. So instead of here, let me just drag my reset block back. Actually, in all of our templates, this reset block is included, so you shouldn't have to do it. I didn't start from one of our templates, obviously, so that's why it's not included. But I have the same site. But I'm not going to write that JavaScript. I'm going to drop in a JavaScript file called Modernizer right here. And let me close this so I don't get confused between the two. So I'm in IE9 mode. If I switch to IE7, you can see it looks exactly the same. So what did Modernizer do? Modernizer is a script that we include in all of our templates. It's some JavaScript. And what it does is when it's loaded, it does the trick for you. It goes through and creates those, all those elements. But it takes that one step further. It actually does some more things. So you can see here underneath the HTML class, there's a bunch of extra classes. You don't really need to know what they are. But what Modernizer does is it kind of queries the browser, asks the browser what it can do, and then we'll actually add classes onto here. So it adds things like no flex, no canvas, or canvas, touch, or no touch. So what you can imagine is you can kind of use Modernizer to gracefully enhance your site. You can actually say, oh, if I'm on a touch device, I want to create the buttons. I want them to be 20 pixels bigger so they're actually easier to click with a thumb or a finger instead of with a mouse. Right? So let's say this is fine and dandy. It shows some new elements. But what about new functionality? So I want to come in here and drag in. Let's say I want to have a video, right? I kind of want to have like a video of the day or a marketing video at the very top. So one of the other things is I want to show off the snippet for video. We now have a snippet for all the new tags. So in the video tag, you can see here that I have, let me just type this. A bunch of sources inside the video tag. And if you remember me talking about how different browsers support different codecs, that's still not worked out. What providing multiple sources is if a browser can't play a source, so if it doesn't know how to play MP4, it'll fall back to the next one, and then it'll fall back to the next one. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to use this one. So if I run this, so in IE9, you can see that I now have a video. I can play the video. I can jump back and forth. You know, it's an HTML5 video. It's nothing fancy. But what happens when I view it in IE7 mode? I get nothing. Not really that great, because IE7, even though it's being created and understands that, it's still treating it as just an inline element. It doesn't know what to do with it. So how can you kind of handle that? Well, there's a simple way. You can come in here and say something like, your browser doesn't support the video tag. And then if I view this in IE7, you can see that you actually see that text. It creates it as a generic container. And you can see I've added some styling that allows this to kind of be stylized such that it's red, big and bold. But that's not very good. That's actually kind of mean to call out to these people that, hey, you can't actually watch this video. You're using some really old browser. So how can we fix that? Actually, I should ask, do we have any questions, by the way? You guys can speak up if you have questions. Just, nothing? OK. So I want to actually include jQuery. So I'm going to drop jQuery and then this demo.js file in here. So if you remember me talking about Modernizer and how it queries the browser, asking a bunch of questions about whether it can do certain things, Modernizer has an object hanging off of it, a bunch of properties hanging off of it in JavaScript. So there's things like audio tag. This will evaluate to true or false if the browser can play the audio tag. And then we go one step further, and it will also ask if whether it can play MP3, M4A, all those different types of video or audio tags. It will actually ask those things, so you can kind of use this to understand more about what the browser is capable of doing inside your JavaScript. But for what I want to do is I'm just going to write some very simple jQuery right here. If you don't know, don't be too scared. This is just a function that executes when the page runs. And then what I want to do is I want to say if the browser doesn't support the video tag, I actually want to grab that whole section. So everything inside of that section that had like funny video paragraph. And then I actually want to hide it. So then you can see if I come in here. Oops, I forgot to save. I added the scripts and didn't save it. I've done that every time. Or not. Oh, oops. Good call. OK, so you can see in IE7, it's actually hidden. They don't actually see something. But if I come in IE9 mode, I actually get the video. The video still plays. Even though all the changes we made, we can skip and move back and forth through the video. So this is a very simple way that you can use something we've included in the box. So by the way, we include all these as pre-installed NuGet packages. I skipped over that in my talk. So let me actually pull the templates back up so you can see. In the NuGet package manager, we include all these as pre-installed NuGet packages. So things like jQuery, jQuery UI, Entity Framework, all those actually get included. So you actually have those ready to go. And if any updates are actually done, you'll get notification via NuGet that says, hey, there's a new jQuery. Hey, there's a new Modernizer. You can go install that. And NuGet takes care of all that for you. But to get back on track, that's how you can use those things that we include in the box to actually, kind of gracefully degrade your site. I know it seems kind of like a harsh word, but a lot of people talk about how they want to gracefully enhance or progressive enhancement. I believe that I just kind of want to develop for the best experience. And then if they're kind of on a browser that doesn't support it, I kind of want to hide things away from them so they don't know they're really missing anything. So if we jump back to the slides. OK, so the ASP.NET team loves HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. That really is true. We're fully invested. We've spent a lot of time around these things. We spent several months developing new templates to provide good boilerplate code for you. And then we've gone through all the trouble of getting all the legal requirements out of the way so we can ship things like Modernizer, jQuery, jQuery UI in the box in our templates so you can just immediately start using those. So we'll go through a recap here. So what do you know? You know what all the fuss is about. You know that HTML5 is a collection of new elements and new functionality and things that blur the line between elements and functionality. And that it's more important to you because it makes your code smaller, simpler, and more semantic. So it's less things you actually have to write. You know that the ASP.NET team is fully invested in these things. We're creating new templates that provide good boilerplate. We're adding designer changes that make writing this type of code much easier and much faster for you guys, along with just generic HTML5 code, or just generic HTML code. And then you also know that we're improving the things like the runtime, WebSockets. We're adding functionality for that as well. And then lastly, you know what the browser issues are. So you know how you can actually work around issues like not fully supported input types or not fully supported elements. You know how to work around all of that. So it's really important to me that you can actually leave this talk knowing how to use these things today. So if I've gone too fast or you don't quite understand anything, please come talk to me after. We can definitely work through it. I can show you examples of how to do things. So here's a few related sessions if you want to take a look at those. There's a few more. I didn't have access to all of them. These are just the ones that are in the track after, or in this track. Like I said, there's a WebSockets session right after this. So if you want to know more about that, please stick around. And with that, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we got some time. I left some time for questions. So.